Hey everyone, welcome to the Wild Borough podcast, and let's get right into the news. So, the first article I wanted to talk about was one that I saw on CNBC. It's called Inflation Fears Down, Consumer Optimism Up. Economy may start to help Biden with voters. And the reason why I found this interesting was it's another article about this same theme that our economy is doing great. Voters are not happy with it, which is expressed in many polls at this point. And the media just seems confused why are voters upset with the economy if we have all these great statistics? Unemployment is low, inflation is coming down, and why aren't they happy with the situation? So to me, they're just leaving out so many obvious things. I mean, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but homelessness is at an all-time high in this country. And a lot of that is directly related to rising costs, including housing specifically. So when you ask people if they're happy about the economy and they're living in an RV by the side of a road or in a friend's house or something like that, they're probably going to say that they're not happy with it. And when you read the mainstream financial media, they don't account for this perspective. So that's why they're confused why people are so upset. And this one quote from the CNBC article in particular, it just summarizes this whole attitude. So they say the current economic mood in America is unusual. Voters report feeling deep economic pessimism, but statistics show they are living through an objectively strong economy. And I say objectively, how? How is it objectively strong? If you are working full time and you can't afford housing, that's not a strong economic situation for you. So they're just either being intentionally blind to the vast majority of Americans' economic experience, or they literally just never go outside their bubble. And this is why they're not telling the whole picture. The next article I wanted to talk about is from the New York Times. It's called Record Rent Burdens Bad or Low Income Life. And this was a very detailed profile of people in South Carolina who are struggling with the housing costs there. And particularly, these are low income earners, but still they're working full-time jobs and they still can't afford their own housing. So I'll read an excerpt from the article here, which says Miss Jones longs for a place of her own. But even though she works full-time for the state government, a modest apartment would consume more than half of her income, a burden most landlords find disqualifying and one she could not sustain. With $41,000 a year in earnings and child support, she is, by government definition, not poor, just homeless. My anxiety is through the roof, she said. I feel almost hopeless. And again, this just illustrates the reality facing a lot of Americans today. I mean, again, this woman's working full time and she's working full time for the state government. So, it's like she's doing everything right. She's full time employed, she's employed by a reputable institution, and she's still losing. She can't afford a home. And in the article, they go into the day-to-day toll this takes on her and her family. Her daughter really enjoys singing, and they've been forced to move in with her mom, who can't stand the noise of her daughter singing. So now her daughter is forced to go outside and practice her singing, and it's just very psychologically difficult. And again, her anxiety is through the roof. So just think about all of the stress that this economic situation is causing for people every single day. And that causes a lot of other health problems, not to mention the fact that you can't have a stable and a happy life if you don't have stable housing. And that just shouldn't be the case if you're full-time employed. So again, the economy is failing a lot of people. And I just wanted to read this other quote, which has more statistics about the situation, especially for these low income earners. So the article says nearly two-thirds of households in the bottom 20% of incomes face severe cost burdens, meaning they pay more than half of their income for rent and utilities, according to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. Among working class renters, the 20% of people in the next level up the income scale, the share with severe burdens has nearly tripled in 2 decades to 17%. For both groups, the proportion with severe cost burdens has reached record highs. So again, this is just illustrating that we are living in a uniquely economically difficult time for many people in America. And this is really what's happening. And the reason why I'm glad that this is in the New York Times is that the mainstream media, they try to paint a picture like everything's doing fine in a lot of cases, but if you really look deeply enough, even they are reporting on the struggles that Americans are facing. And the statistics I just quoted you, it shows you that this is a widespread problem. This isn't just some issue that this one woman is having. This story of this woman illustrates a greater trend, and this is the real issue facing America, and these are the real issues that our politicians should be working on solutions for. The next topic I wanted to talk about is kind of the funny timing that happened this past week. Jerome Powell had his press conference, the Fed had their monthly, it's not every month, but whatever, 10 times a year or something. They had their December meeting, and they basically said that, the worst of the inflation crisis is probably over. Um, Inflation was actually transitory. It took longer than everyone was expecting. And probably they're going to be able to start cutting rates in the year ahead. So the next day, this report came out that shows that homelessness is at a record level in the United States. So again, to hammer on the same theme, there's just this disconnect between the message you will get from many of the powerful people in our society about how the economy is doing. They're going to try to tell you that, it's fine for most people. And then you just have the reality that homelessness is at a record high. So let me get into two quotes. This first article from the New York Times is Jerome Powell's Fed pulling off a soft landing. This economist from Bank of America, he says the Fed right now looks pretty dang good in terms of how things are turning out. So when he says that the Fed's looking pretty dang good in terms of how things are turning out, I mean, who is he talking about? Who are things turning out well for right now? I mean, is he talking about the average American? Is he talking about the average stockholder, the average retiree, the average young American who is graduating college? We're going to get into it later about student debt and housing costs, but what is he talking about? Things are looking good. I mean, the Fed tries to boil everything down to the inflation number and employment, which is because that's technically their two mandates. Those are the two things that they're trying to manage. And right now, the employment number is very low. I think the unemployment number is like 3.8% or something, which looks good on paper. And inflation is down to around 3%, which is nowhere near as high as it was, which again looks good on paper, but that doesn't even come close to telling the story of the economy that's facing most people. I mean, we had this huge cost rise and the costs are still elevated. So the Fed is arguing that the wages should start going up, which will help with that situation. But people are having a hard time, which is evidenced by this other article in the New York Times. Homelessness rose to record level this year, government says. And I'll read a quote from that. Homelessness surged this year to the highest level on record, the federal government reported on Friday. So this was December, what was that, the 14th, 15th? Biden administration officials and academic experts said the increase reflected both a sharp rise in rents and the end of the extraordinary measures the government had enacted during the pandemic, including emergency rental aid and bans on eviction. The most significant causes are the shortage of affordable homes and the high cost of housing, said Jeff Olive, head of the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. So again, just getting back to the quote from the Bank of America economist, the Fed right now looks pretty dang good in terms of how things are turning out. So how things are turning out are we have more homeless people in this country than ever in its history. And if you read into the New York Times article and the report that came out, I mean, it was pretty much every demographic across the board is experiencing elevated homelessness. I mean, it was families, it was older people, it was children. There is this migrant issue, which will increase the homeless population, but this particular report came out before a lot of the most recent migrant crisis. I mean, the crisis has been going on for many years, but the latest surge that is overwhelming the homeless shelter system in a lot of places. I've been reading about New York City in particular. But having said all that, every demographic across the board is experiencing increased homelessness. So I, I just don't see how you can say things are turning out well. You know, if you have an economic view of the country that allows you to say things are turning out well, I mean, you need to expand your definition because that's not accurate at all. And the decisions you're making based on such a small, contrived view of the economy are just bound to not help everyone. And I mean, if that's the point, you know, if we want this economy where asset holders do well, property holders do well, stock market investors do well, and everyone else is really struggling, then yeah, it's been a huge success. But for everyday people who want to live happy lives and productive lives and enjoy their family and pursue their interests in life, that's going in the wrong direction. The next article I wanted to talk about is from the New York Times as well. Common theme. I do enjoy reading the New York Times because they eventually will give you a comprehensive look at what's happening in the country. Even if you go on the NewYorkTimes.com, the front page of the website, they may emphasize certain themes over others. But if you really look at all the articles that they put out, which I will admit I do almost every day, they eventually will tell you what's really happening and provide some relevant statistics. So this story is called American Dream Deferred: Why Housing Prices May Pose a Problem for Biden. And it basically profiles some young Americans and talking about the housing market. And this 125-year-old couple, they're going to open houses, but they're kind of just investigating and checking things out. I mean, they say they have no realistic expectations of owning a house like in the foreseeable future. And they talk about how even some of their friends who are maybe a few years older than them have a way better chance at owning a house because of the financial situation that's facing them right now. So I'll read this quote from the article. Rents have climbed about 22% since late 2019, and a key index of home prices is up by an even heftier 46%. Mortgages now hover around 7% as the Federal Reserve has raised rates to the highest level in 22 years in a bid to contain inflation. Those factors have combined to make both monthly rent and the dream of first-time home ownership increasingly unattainable for many young families. So, again, not to beat a dead horse, but I mean, a lot of young people, when they graduate college, it's buying a house is like the next thing in life for you, especially if you're married and want to start a family. And it's not that people don't want to do that, it's that they can't afford it. The numbers don't work. And again, this is unique to 2023. I mean, the numbers that I just read you, rents have climbed 22% since late 2019. So over 4 years, rents have gone up 22% and home prices is up almost 50%. So it's just crazy. I mean, people, you know, they want to have a future and it's like, what's the future? Like, why are we working and saving up money when you can't even buy a house. Like it's not even a realistic option. So the article, it gets more political. They talk about the implications for Joe Biden in the election about this and some solutions that they're proposing, I guess. But again, just some more hard numbers that show you the challenges that a lot of people are facing right now. The next article is about student loan payments restarting for many. I'll read the headline from the New York Times. As student loan collections restart, millions are not yet paying. So the article is talking about how I think there was about 43 million people are now having to restart their student loan payments, and they figured that about 9 million people have not paid, or one number was even higher. I think it was only 60% have actually made their first payment, but the article talks a lot about how there's just there's actually a lot of issues with the repayment systems and people are trying to make their payments, but because of like technical reasons they haven't been able to, or the status of their loan is not clear. So the whole thing sounds like a big mess, but the article does account for or tries to account for a lot of that, and they still figure that about 9 million people have not made their payment yet. And again, common theme, people are they don't have a lot of extra cash and they don't have a lot of extra cash to make these payments. So I'll read this quote from the article. Miss Luna just received a notice with her new monthly payment amount, $316, and her first due date of December 20th. She plans to pay it, but it will be a stretch. Rent, healthcare, and other bills consume more than half her paycheck. During the pandemic timeout, she was able to pay down her credit cards and build a small savings account. It was the first time I was like, oh, I paid all my bills and I still have money to pay for groceries, and I have this small amount of money sitting to the side. This is amazing, she said. Resuming loan payments will wipe out that cushion. So again, this is a working woman. She's in her 30s, and an extra $300 a month is like putting her over the edge. So it just shows you the lack of financial cushion that a lot of people have. And you could say, oh, well, she should be saving money more, she should be reducing her costs, whatever. This, in my opinion, is again, it's a trend. I mean, 9 million people couldn't make their payments. It shows you that everyone is in, I shouldn't say everyone, many millions of Americans are in very tight financial economic conditions right now. And of course, they would want to pay their loan if they could. I mean, the more you put it off, the more interest accrues and all these things. So there's a pretty big incentive to get this off of your monthly bill, and people would if they could. But it's like you get down to the point where you're like, well, should I buy groceries? Should I pay for housing? Should I pay the electric bill, or should I pay my student loan this month? And it's just again, the title of the previous article is American Dream Deferred. I mean, the promise told to a generation of Americans was that education is the way to a brighter future. You have to go to college and get your degree. And people took on huge amounts of debts to do that. And now when they graduate, you're extremely limited in what you can do in life because of your finances. I mean, for this woman in particular, say she wants to take time off and explore some hobby or interest, like that's totally out of that's not even going to be on her mind of options in life. And I just think the question is like, is this really what we want our society to be like? I mean, everyone is just killing themselves to pay these student loan payments, which like I mean, this money. So one of the comments, I posted this on Reddit, and somebody just said it, they just wish that the interest rate was lower on their loan. And I mean, that's a great point. Like, we couldn't forgive the loans completely because of the Supreme Court ruling, but the Federal Reserve has no problems giving out low interest rate loans to banks when the banks are in financial distress. So why is it that we have no sympathy or leniency for our young people in this country? I mean, how are they supposed to get started in life? You know, these are the critical years of their lives, and we're basically just putting them in a straitjacket and giving them very few options on what they can do on a day-to-day basis, and then what they can do with their money, you know, and that's important. How much money you have really determines your options in life to a big degree. I mean, I won't say totally determines your happiness or anything, but if you're financially self-sufficient, like you have a lot more control over what you do on a daily basis. And when your life is determined by these interest rates and these debts, you just don't have control. So it's not a good situation. And I know that Joe Biden tried to forgive a lot of these debts to people, which was controversial for obvious reasons. I mean, these students did take on these debts. I would argue that a lot of people, when they're graduating high school, you're 18 years old and you can't think through these weighty financial decisions that are going to probably affect you. I mean, how long you, this woman's 35, like how long is the student debt going to affect your life? You know, that's 17 years since being 18 and going into college. So when you're 18, you don't think, hey, when I'm twice as old as I am now, I'm still going to be dealing with this financial decision I made, because going to college, you know, everyone always says that's a great thing to do, but it's it's just sad. It's just sad that everyone's trapped in this situation. A lot of people are stuck in this situation, and I don't know what the answer is, but again, harping on the same theme of this episode, I just don't think you can say the economy is doing great when you have a lot of people in this situation. The last article I wanted to talk about is also from the New York Times. It's called "A Shock for Many Retirees: Social Security Benefits Can Be Taxed." And the thing that caught my eye about this was that, first of all, it was a surprise to me that I didn't know that Social Security benefits are taxable. That just didn't really seem to make sense to me. I mean, like, that's all just tax money, and then it's a public benefit, at least is just what I thought about it. But apparently they are. But the thing that caught my eye was even this situation is affected by inflation. So I'll read the quote from the article. Over the past 39 years, both Social Security payments and federal income tax brackets have continually shifted upward to compensate for inflation, but the income thresholds that result in a retiree's benefits being taxed have not. When the tax took effect in 1984 during the Reagan administration, it was estimated to affect about 10% of Social Security recipients. By 2022, 48% of recipients were paying tax on some of their benefits and paid $48.6 billion that year, according to the Social Security Administration. So this just shows the effect that inflation is having across the board. I mean, I've talked a lot about the effect on young people during this episode, but this is a totally different population. So these are people who just retired, obviously. And um, yeah, 48% are paying some tax on their Social Security benefits compared to 10% in 1984. So it's like, you know, where's all that money going? I mean, why hasn't that been adjusted for inflation? So that seems like something that would be very easy for the government to fix, that would immediately help people and improve their economic condition. And I don't know, maybe this is something that with the election coming up, politicians will be motivated to improve. Okay, that's it for the podcast this week. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you later.